particularly at that time, used relatively small numbers of subjects.
Has that study ever been peer-reviewed?
Yes,
Who peer-reviewed it?
the journal where it was published,
When was this?
1995.
Has it been peer-reviewed at all other than the journal that published it?
Well, that's where peer review happens.
Well, isn't it true, doctor, that peer review can happen either in journals that publish it, or they can go back in the future and someone can try to replicate your findings, right?
Well, people have criticized the study, but so many other investigators, including us, have done conceptual replications of this study for years and years, and
Speaking of,
so I don't know what you're referring to.
speaking of, you just brought up critics who criticized your study. Lynn S. Cook and Martha Dean wrote an article titled "Lost in a Shopping Mall: A Breach of Professional Ethics," correct? You're aware of that book, that study, correct? That article?
That's the opinion of that author, yes.
That article was published in 1999 in Ethics and Behavior, a peer-reviewed journal edited by a professor from Harvard Medical School. Is that right?
Sorry, Counsel, could you repeat?
That article was published in 1999 in Ethics and Behavior, a peer-reviewed journal edited by a professor from Harvard Medical School, correct?
I don't know who was that critique was published.
In fact, there was an article you're familiar with by Professor Kenneth Pope from 1996 in the American Psychologist titled "Memory Abuse and Science: Questioning Claims About the False Memory Syndrome Epidemic." You're familiar with that, correct?
He has certainly been critical, yes.
In that study, in the Mall study, many of your subjects were the children of your research assistants, correct?
I don't remember. This study was so many studies ago.
Wait, doctor, you've been questioned extensively about this study, both in criminal courts, in civil litigation, etc., correct?
Yeah, but the study was done in the 90s, and I just don't remember the details. There have been so many studies and so many publications since then.
Doctor, haven't you been criticized and found yourself in court defending your work on the Mall study? And so when you say, you know, I don't really remember if that study involved the children of my research assistants, are you telling me, as you sit here, you do not know that answer?
As I sit here, I don't recall exactly the nature of those 24 individuals who were part of that study.
So I want you to assume for a moment, in a hypothetical, that it did involve many of the individuals in the study were the children of your research assistants.
Yes.
Would you consider that to be good science?
Yes.
And again, I just want to go back to something you said yesterday, 2 days ago, make sure that I'm correct on this. Is it your position, you've now had a day to think about it, that you believe it would be within the standards of ethics for your profession if you were retained in a case to testify for the defense where a family member was the named victim in the case? That's what you testified to yesterday or the day before. I just want to make sure that's still your position.
It would depend on the circumstances. I don't think that 100% of the time, just because somebody is a family member, it would prohibit it. I don't know of any regulation about that.
So, doctor, you're saying within the ethics of the area that you practice in, that it would be appropriate, I want to give you the following scenario. You are retained by a defendant who is accused of sexually assaulting, raping a number of women. One of those women is your daughter, a family member. My question would be, are you saying that you don't know whether there would be any bar from you testifying in that case for the defense when your daughter's a named victim?
I'm going to object. Argument, it has already been asked yesterday.
Sidebar.
agree, Dr. Loftus, that your study that we've been talking about, the mall study, has no relevance whatsoever to the memories of adult witnesses who are talking about adult memories? Would you agree?
It's a study that shows that you can plant a rich false memory in the minds of ordinary people.
Right, a rich false...
That's what it demonstrated.
A rich false memory implanting a childhood memory, correct?
Correct.
When they were children. And doctor, didn't you have the families cooperating with you in assisting with the implantation of that memory?
In that particular study, yes.
Well, so doctor, don't you think it would have been relevant, without me bringing it out in cross-examination, for you to say, hey, listen, in that study, not only was it memories we were implanting in people of things that happened when they were little children, but we had their family members telling them that this false event happened. Don't you think that would have been relevant to explain when I was asking you these questions?
I don't know that if you asked me about the details of the methodology, I would have given the answer.
So it's your testimony that you didn't intentionally not provide that information, I just didn't ask for it. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the rules that govern members of the American Psychological Association?
I'm not sure what rules you're talking about. I'm not a member of the organization.
In fact, you were being investigated and you, at that point, resigned from the organization, correct?
I resigned from the organization not knowing that anybody was doing any complaining or investigating.
But you found out, doctor, that there was a complaint and investigation going on right at the time you decided to leave the organization, correct?
The organization never confirmed or denied whether there was any investigation.
So, doctor, you would agree that the American Psychological Association, which you were a member of for years, is the premier organization for psychologists like yourself in the United States. Is that correct?
No, in my opinion, the Association for Psychological Science is the premier organization.
Are you familiar with APA Rule 306 governing conflict of interest? You familiar with that?
I don't have any idea what you're talking about.
Okay, I'm going to read it to you. Psychologists refrain from taking on a professional role when personal, scientific, professional, legal, financial, or other interests or relationships could reasonably be expected to, 1, impair their objectivity, competence, or effectiveness in performing their functions as psychologists, or 2, expose the person or organization with whom the professional relationship exists to harm or exploitation. Do you disagree yourself, doctor, with that rule?
Well, I'm not sure who that rule applies to or what kinds of situations or settings.
That's not what I asked you. Do you agree in general with what is laid out in that rule regarding how conflicts of interest should work for psychologists?
I'd have to think about it. I don't. It sounds like you don't want to do harm to people, and that's a good idea.
Would you agree, doctor, that if you took on a case where a family member was a victim of a sex crime, if you took on a case like that, you would have a personal interest in the case?
I would think so.
So doctor, my question is, how could you even contemplate taking on a case where you would testify in a situation where a loved one was the named victim? Will you just concede that you couldn't do that?
If I had a daughter who accused my son of bad behavior and I knew the daughter was a liar or an exaggerator, I might feel very comfortable testifying in that case about what I knew and what I thought.
Yes, but you'd be testifying, doctor, correct, not as an expert witness, but as somebody with precipient information about the case. it would be inappropriate, you would agree, for you to testify as an expert witness in that kind of case. Agreed?
Objection, Your Honor, the relevancy to this case.
You can answer.
Well, I would feel comfortable testifying in that case if in that particular fact pattern. I don't know that anybody would call me as an expert witness. I can't imagine it, but I'd feel very comfortable testifying in that case.
I'm going to ask one more question in this area. Would you agree, doctor, that if you testified, given the rule I just read to you, that that would appear to be an obvious and tremendous conflict?
I'd have to think about that a little more, because I don't know who that rule and what kind of behavior that rule is applying to.
All right, the last question I'm going to ask you today is I'm going to come back to that when I get there. So I want you to be thinking about that, because I will ask you about it again. Let me move on for right now.
Your Honor, move to strike the speech.
No,
in there.
Okay, yeah,
There was no speech, Your Honor.
that's fine. Doesn't matter.
All right. Would you agree that implanting childhood memories in individuals about getting lost in a mall as a child is different than an adult's memory of a close friend discussing their involvement in covering up a murder?
It's different.
Is it different in a way that you would agree that you would be hard-pressed to properly utilize your findings in your mall study to give opinions based on what you found in that mall study as to a situation where it was an adult talking about a situation where a close friend had confessed as an adult that they were complicit in covering up a murder?
I would feel perfectly appropriate talking about the mall study as the first study to demonstrate that you could plant rich false memories into somebody's mind when there have now been so many other studies done in so many universities around the world that show that you can plant rich false memories in adults, not only about childhood, but also about teenage years and about more recent non-existent experiences. So I might mention that study only because it was the first to use this particular method. But many other people have used that method, done it much better than we did.
Any study you're aware of where they've checked or analyzed the implantation of statements that a close friend had covered up a murder?
I don't know of a study specifically about that, no.
When I say the word discordant with respect to the work that you do, what does that mean?
I don't know what you mean.
You're aware the 2021 New Yorker magazine article by Rachel Aviv. You've read that article, correct? It came out this year.
Yes?
And would you agree that the article discusses that your study has, quote, assumed an iconic status because one of the most famous experiments of the century, that is referring to that experiment, has lent itself to conflicting interpretation over time. Its reputation is discordant with its size. There were only 24 subjects. Then it describes the subjects, what you did, and then it says, Lofton and others have described the study as a kind of parable for skepticism. But Stephen Brown, a social psychologist at England's Nottingham Trent University who studies memory, told me, this is in the article, for those of us differently positioned, the parable is entirely about power. The study reveals the ease with which children can be betrayed by adults who lie to them, rewriting their stories. Do you disagree with that criticism by Professor Brown?
I don't understand that criticism. You'll have to ask that professor.
Well, so, Doctor, would it make sense that that criticism would appear to be over the idea that you had family members talk to these people and tell them, this is what happened to you as a kid. And because they were little when it happened, and because they're trusting the people telling them this information, that it made it much easier to implant memories, and then allowed you to take the next step and try to apply that to situations that don't involve memories from when they were a little kid and don't involve assistance from people they trust implanting those memories. Does that criticism seem valid to you?
Well, it doesn't, because this study is so old, and so many other studies have been done that plant rich false memories for things that happened not only in childhood, but they've planted rich false memories for things that happened when you were a teenager, and they've planted rich false memories for things that happened a week ago. So I think to go back and take a study from 25 years ago, when so much scientific work has been done since then, is frankly a waste of time.
Doctor, have you stated before that the results in your case, the results in your study do not apply to anybody beyond the 24 subjects?
Right. The figure that we found, that 25% of the sample fell for the suggestion and developed a partial or complete false memory, I've never said that means that 25% of people out there in the real world will fall for this kind of suggestion.
Did you say the following, doctor, during testimony in EM versus Los Angeles Unified School District from 2017, page 242 to 243? Question: so is it your testimony that the Lost in the Shopping Mall study was not studying any population except for the 24 individuals in the study? Answer: I believe we had a sentence in there that you brought up last week where we wrote that we were not even making a claim about what the percent is in the population. Is that what you said?
That sounds like something I would say, and it sounds like something I may have just said.
Okay. And would you agree, doctor, that many other psychologists, people that you respect, have criticized your methodology about using family members to implant memories, and that can make it seem as if the implantation of memories generally is easier to accomplish?
Well, somebody might make that criticism, but so many other people have done the same kind of study with this methodology since then that they'd have to be criticizing a whole big body of work.
Are you familiar with Kathy Pezdek, P-E-Z-D-E-K?
I know who she is, yes.
And this is a name that you're well aware of because she's been a very vocal critic of many of the studies you've done, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
What's your objection?
To relevancy of this,
Oral.
it's accumulative.
Overrule.
352.
Yeah, overrule. We'll see what the question is.
Fine.
Do you recall her criticism being that it's easier to implant a memory when it's someone trusted telling it to you, although using a family member rather than an unrelated experimenter to attempt to implant the false memories will generally be expected to create a more convincing context for planting the memories? Do you agree with that statement?
I think I agree with that.
You yourself have said previously in testimony that using the trusted family member was critical as to how you were able to implant the false memory, correct?
I believe that that was an ingredient in why in that type of study we were able to plant these false memories.
Wait, an ingredient or the ingredient?
It was an ingredient.
So you don't believe that that was the overwhelming reason why you were able to implant these memories in these adults? You don't believe that using their family members to say to them, hey, this is what happened to you when you were 4 years old, you got lost in the mall. You don't think that was a key feature in you being able to come up with the results you came up with?
I would say it was, yes, it was a key feature.
And let me ask you, isn't it true that in this experiment, even when you had the loved one telling the adult that these memories were true, that 75 to 80% of the people still resisted the incorrect memories.
Well, if 25% fell for it, that meant 75% did not.
Thanks. Is that a yes then? Am I?
Yes, but not, I would not go to 80.
Okay. By the way, would you think for the validity of the study, would you think there'd be a difference of whether it was 75 or 80?
It might.
Tell me how. Tell me how the difference of 5% in that study would make a difference.
Well, I bet a 5% difference in some kinds of studies can be important.
That's not what I asked you. I want to know, you responded, it was your answer, that I'll go with 75%, I won't go with 80. So my question is, if you had 75% versus 80% of these people basically rejecting the false memory, please explain what the difference would be scientifically to you with respect to this study.
I feel uncomfortable when someone misstates results of a study that I know very well, and that's what you did when you went to 80.
Doctor, I thought your testimony was, I don't really remember this study very well because it occurred so many years ago and I've done so many hundreds of studies since.
Well, I know the 25% figure.
Well, in fact, when you were talking to Rachel Aviv, weren't you the one telling her how groundbreaking and important this study was?
Absolutely not.
So that puffery didn't come from you?
Absolutely not.
Were you aware when you read the article that it was puffing you up in your studies?
Well, that was a part of the article that I was pleased about, even if there were other parts of the article that I was not that comfortable with.
All right, let's talk about, are adults and children equally susceptible to post-event contamination?
Young children are more susceptible.
And you also, I think you now have agreed that even with adults, if you try to implant memories from when they were children, you would expect that would be easier to do than a memory being implanted from when they were an adult, correct?
Yes, I would say there's a yes.
Did any of your studies, try to implant an adult memory?
We've done studies where we plant adult memories, yes. Not back then, but
Any over the age of 21 or 30?
yes. There have been a number of studies where false memories have been planted for things that happened in adulthood.
I want to ask you, are you aware of a study you've done that involved the implantation of a false memory for somebody who was over 30?
Well, many of these subjects were over 30.
The memory, the implantation of the memory, that the memory itself was from a time when the subject was over 30. In other words, that the memory you're implanting, not the age of the person you're implanting it to.
Well, I think even the example I gave earlier in testimony, where with the doctored photograph, we were able to plant a false memory in adults that they had witnessed or read or seen a photograph of President Obama shaking the hand of the president of Iran. That was an implantation in an adult about an experience that would have happened in adulthood.
And would you expect that a person, is it comparable, doctor, in your opinion, that a person being manipulated into having a false memory by looking at a picture of President Obama and President Bush, people that they don't know, where they're not involved, does that in any way have any relevance to whether somebody is going to have an implanted memory of a close friend of theirs admitting involvement in covering up a murder?
That work is part of a large body of scientific work on the malleability of human memory.
So would the answer to the question I asked be no?
No, it would probably be yes.
Oh, okay, please explain how it would probably be yes.
Because there's a large body of work on the malleability of memory, how it is that people can come to remember things differently than they really were, or have entirely false memories that educates us about the nature of human memory.
So you're telling this jury, I just want to make sure we're clear on this, you're telling this jury that, you know what, if I can take a picture and I can doctor it, and this picture has Obama and George Bush shaking hands, whatever it might be.
President of Iran.
I'm sorry?
President of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Chestnut. Has Obama and the president of Iran shaking hands, that you're telling me that you would expect to produce the same kind of important memories as a close friend admitting they were involved in covering up a murder. You see a parallel there, is that correct?
These are different kinds of memories, but different kinds of memories can be susceptible to contamination.
Right.
And that's what the whole body of scientific work demonstrates.
Right, and the different kinds of memories, doctor, you would agree that memories involving a photo of individuals that the subject doesn't know are much easier to manipulate and to fabricate than a memory involving a close friend confessing their involvement in covering up a murder, correct?
Well, they're different kinds of experiences. It might be harder to try to convince somebody that that they had a conversation like that. It might be harder, but it's a little bit of apples and oranges.
So you said it might be harder. Will you give the opinion that, in your professional opinion, it likely would be harder, or do you want to stick with the might?
It seems like it might be harder.
I just want to ask you, maybe, if I were to ask you, doctor, how sure are you that the earth is round? What would your response be?
I'm pretty sure the earth is round.
So you would have a qualifier with, even with the earth being round, there would be a qualifier. Pretty is a qualifier, correct?
Well, that's the way I'm comfortable putting it.
So I guess what that means is that, I guess any question I ask with any hypothetical, it will always be followed by a qualifier, is that correct?
There would frequently be qualifiers, yes.
All right, let me continue. Let's talk about your boy shot in the face study. Do you remember that one?
Yes?
You did a study, and this was involving the issue of how a traumatic event can affect memory, is that right?
Yes.
In this study, what you had was, you had a boy being shot in a situation where they're chasing after a robber, someone who had done something. The boy is chasing, and he ends up being shot. Is that correct?
It was a film, and the employees of the bank were chasing the thief,
Right.
and the thief shot and hit the boy in the face.
Right, and the boy in this was wearing a sports jersey with a number on it. Is that correct?
Yes. This is a study from the early 80s, so I'm not sure I remember what the number was
No,
anymore.
no, the number, I'm not asking you to remember the number. It probably wasn't 58 or 59, right?
No, it was, I believe it was in the 40s.
Okay, no, but I'm not asking you to remember which number it was. I'm just asking, he was wearing a number on his jersey, right?
Yes?
And the purpose of this experiment was, you asked people in the study who are seeing this boy being shot to recall the boy's jersey number, correct?
Yes, the number on the jersey.
Would you in any way expect, I just want to ask you, just as a psychologist, would you expect that if somebody witnessed a little boy being shot, that they would in any way be aware or remember, yeah, the boy was wearing a number 13 jersey? Is that how you think that memory works?
Well, if you hand me the study, I'll be able to tell you how many people actually did remember the number.
Well, let me ask you, did you really need a study to demonstrate that would be a peripheral detail? Is that correct?
It was a fairly peripheral detail,
Wait.
yes.
Okay. So the gist is, little boy gets shot. Agreed?
Well, there's more to it. There was a bank robbery that occurred, and there were many other details that we asked about about that film.
In that film, the main event was the little boy got shot. Is that correct? In the face.
Well, that was the end of the event, yes. And
Is
would-
that the event that you would have found to be, as a psychologist, the most memorable?
I would think so, yes. It was
And-
shocking.
Yes, and would you agree that in terms of ranking down the different events that were depicted in that film, that the number on the boy's jersey would have been near the bottom of what you would expect to be an important detail?
Right, and relatively few people remembered it.
How many people, by the way, in that experiment forgot that the boy got shot?
Well, the boy only got shot in some of the conditions.
How many people in the experiment who saw the boy get shot did not remember it?
I don't know if we asked about that in the conditions where the boy was shot. I'm not sure we asked a question about, was he shot or wasn't he?
So, doctor, as you sit here today, you won't agree that, to the best of your memory, there was nobody in that experiment who saw the boy being shot that didn't remember it. Will you give us that much?
We didn't ask the question, but I would assume if we had, people would have remembered it.
All right. Another one of your famous studies was false memories of fabricated political events. Is that correct?
You'll have to give me more retrieval cues, because
Sure. Did you do a study that involved 5,269 participants who were asked about their memories of 3 true and 1 of 5 fabricated political events?
and what was the fabricated event?
Well, there were several fabricated events, but do you not remember, have I not given you enough information for you to recall that you did this study?
Not enough information. I
Well,
need-
do you recall being criticized for a study where you were looking at political affiliations and beliefs, the study that I'm indicating, and being criticized that in your study, although you had an enormous amount of people, that only 5% of the participants were conservative? Do you recall that?
Oh, that was the study where we looked at whether your political beliefs and biases affected the likelihood that you would fall sway to the suggestion and develop a false memory.
Right, and in that study, you only used 5% of your participants were conservative. Do you think that's a fair representation of the general public?
Take the sidebar, please.
I'm sorry?
Take the sidebar. your seat, we will. And so you're number one, you'll remain. Everyone else, have a great long, long weekend.